All right, so today we're gonna take up the lecture 8 study guide, which is on the digestive system. So let's get to it. First question: list 4 accessory organs in the digestive system. So accessory organs are organs that will be secreting various enzymes and mixtures into your GI tract. The food themselves do not physically go into the accessory organs. And so the examples of accessory organs include things like salivary glands. Okay, so we have, of course, 3 pairs of salivary glands. Another example of accessory organ would be gallbladder. We also have the liver as well as the pancreas. Okay, so these are all the accessory organs that we have. Again, they secrete enzymes and digestive mixtures into your GI tract. So another word for your GI tract is actually alimentary canal. Okay, so this is same as GI, gastrointestinal tract. Okay, so basically it's one continuous tube from the mouth to the anus. And along the entire GI tract, there are actually 4 layers that is found throughout the alimentary canal. And so starting with the most superficial layer, we'll say superficial here. Okay, the most superficial layer, that is called the serosa. Serosa. Okay. One layer beneath the serosa is the muscularis. Okay, so the muscularis would have 2 separate layers of muscles, right? We have the circular muscle, and we also have the longitudinal muscle. Okay. The stomach has an additional layer, the diagonal ones, right? The oblique muscularis. But for the most part, the rest of the GI tract, only 2 layers of muscularis. Of course, as the name implies, that's the layer that will allow the movement of these parts of the GI tract to help push the food forward, for example. Beneath the muscularis, we have the submucosa. Okay, the submucosa is where you will find things like contains blood vessels, right? Nerve endings, so on and so forth. And finally, we have the mucosa. Okay, this is the layer that is going to be in direct contact with your food. Okay, so most superficial layer, this is the deepest layer. Okay. Next, list 4 major sphincters inside the digestive tracts. Sphincters are kind of like valves in the heart that we learned about. It prevents things from going backwards. Okay, it keeps them moving forward in the GI tract. And there are 4 main sphincters in the digestive tract. The first one is the cardiac sphincter. Cardiac sphincter. Okay, so another name for the cardiac sphincter is lower esophageal sphincter. Okay, I'm going to be sticking with the cardiac sphincter. That's the one that is located at the top of the stomach. If the cardiac sphincter is not closing properly, then you would have a little bit of acid reflux, and you might get a bit of a heartburn. At the bottom of the stomach, we have the pyloric sphincter. Pyloric sphincter. Okay, so that controls the amount of food that's going to move from the stomach to the duodenum, the first part of your small intestine. And later on, between the small intestine and the large intestine, we have the ileocecal sphincter. And so this one is between the ileum, which is the last part of your small intestine, and the cecum, the first part of your large intestine. Ileocecal sphincter. And then we also have the internal and external anal sphincter. Okay. Question number 4. The chemical digestion of protein first begins at the, can someone tell me where does the chemical digestion of protein first begins? Which part of the GI tract do we first chemically break down protein? So we said mouth. Okay, anyone else? Okay. Small intestine from Mary. Okay, good try. These are good try. The correct answer is the stomach. Okay. In the stomach, there is pepsinogen, right? Pepsinogen, which gets activated into pepsin. So the pepsin in the stomach will start breaking down the protein. Okay, so let me write that down for you. Pepsin breaks down protein into short chains of amino acids. Okay. The chemical digestion of carbohydrates first begins at the mouth. Okay, so in the mouth, in the saliva, there are things, there are enzymes, right? The amylase. Okay, so amylase will break it down. Okay. The enzymes are coming up anyway, so we can talk more about it later. And chemical digestion of lipids, that actually does not begin until we get to the duodenum. Okay, when you receive the pancreatic juices from the pancreas. Okay, and in that pancreatic juice, there are lipase, okay, which would help break down the lipids. Okay. Next question, state the function of each of the following enzymes. Okay, so amylase. Amylase is found in saliva as well as the pancreatic juice. So what it does, it takes amylose, which is the sugar, long chain of glucose connected together. And the amylose is going to break it down into maltose, okay, maybe a little bit of glucose, as well as some oligosaccharide. Okay, so here is your maltose. Okay, it's just going to be a bunch of glucose molecule linked together like that. Okay. So amylase will come and, for example, chop it off like this, chop it off, chop it off, chop it off, chop it off. So you might get like a single glucose. Right? Two glucose together is called maltose. And oligosaccharides, like a short chain of, glucose. Oligo means little, right? Little sugar chain. There's a question, when we hear someone has been infected by H. pylori, is it in the pyloric sphincter? No, H. pylori is bacteria that is going to bury themselves in the mucus lining of the stomach. Okay, and it's going to increase your chance of getting ulcer. Not necessarily in the pyloric sphincter, but it's often found at the lower part of the stomach. Right, that part of the stomach is called the pylori. Right, so in general, the lower part of the stomach. That's what it's referred to. Okay, That is the amylose. Then we have the pepsin. Okay, pepsin is going to take your protein and you're going to get like short strands of amino acids, right? Plus maybe individual amino acids. Okay, trypsin does the same thing. Okay, pepsin and trypsin, they're cousins. They're related in terms of functions. And then lipase, we start with the lipid, which would then break it down into glycerol plus fatty acids. Okay, that's what it will do. All right, moving on. List 3 functions of hydrochloric acid found in the stomach. Well, first of all, it's very, very low in pH, so it's going to denature proteins. Okay. Denature means it's going to unfold the proteins, and by unfolding it, it makes it easier. For pepsin to break it down. Okay. Now the pepsin was not created in its active form. Okay, it's actually created in the form of pepsinogen. Okay, so HCl, hydrochloric acid, will help activate pepsinogen into pepsin. Okay. Does anybody have an other function for hydrochloric acid? Okay, this one is perhaps a little bit obvious and you might not, thought of it, but it's something we learned before, right? It is there for immune defense. Okay, so the stuff that we eat sometimes have bacteria and pathogens in it, and we want to kill those pathogens as best as we can before they are going to cause any kind of problem. And so by having a little bit of hydrochloric acid, we will be able to achieve just that. Okay. So that is that. Anybody have any questions before we move on? Alrighty. Next part. List 3 features that increase surface area in the small intestine. Okay, so the small intestine is not like a smooth interior like that, right? It actually have these foldings. Okay, so these foldings, they're called circular folds. Okay, and if you zoom in onto one of these circular folds, you will see that on these circular folds, there are these mini folds. So the mini folds, they are called the villi. Okay. Villus is singular. Villi are these finger-like projections on top of the circular folds. And if you zoom in one more time, onto the villi, you will see that the individual villi, they actually are made up of cells. Like these are cells, okay, and the cells have like mini hair on them. Okay, I can zoom in one more time to draw one of them. So they look like this. They're not cilia, but they're like, actual cell membrane that forms these finger-like projections again. So these are called microvilli. Okay, so collectively, all these foldings substantially increase the surface area. Okay, of course, you want to have large surface area in the small intestine so that you can maximize your ability to absorb things. Okay, so that is that. Let's move on to the next part. True or false? First question. Chemical digestion of food involves digestive enzymes that links monomer to form polymers using hydrolysis. That is not true. That is not true. Okay. When you want to digest food, you want to, this is actually really wrong. You want to break polymers into monomers. We learned that last semester, right? The concept of monomers and polymers. Okay, next one. Pepsin is an example of an enzyme that breaks down protein. Okay. We mentioned this already. It is true. Amylase is an example of an enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates in the mouth. That is also true. Okay. Amylase breaks down amylose. Number 4. The liver is an accessory organ that secretes bile into the jejunum that helps in lipid digestion. This is actually false. It does not secrete it into the jejunum, but rather it secretes it into the duodenum. Okay, and it's not the liver that secretes it into the duodenum, right? It is the gallbladder. Okay, the liver makes the bile, but then it's stored in the gallbladder. Okay, the only time the liver is going to secrete directly into the duodenum is if you remove your gallbladder. So if someone has gallstone or something, they remove the gallbladder, then the liver will secrete directly into the duodenum. Next part, the epiglottis prevents food from entering the nasal cavity during swallowing. That's false. It is not the epiglottis. Okay, it is the uvula. Okay, or you can change it to like the epiglottis prevents food from entering the trachea, right, during swallowing. Okay, either way is okay. Number 6, different parts of the tongue is responsible for detecting a specific taste. In the lecture, I said that is not true. Okay, you have taste receptors, chemoreceptors throughout the entire tongue for all the tastes. The pyloric sphincter prevents acid reflux. If you have been paying attention, then you know that is not true. It is the cardiac sphincter that is responsible for preventing acid reflux. Food is pushed down the esophagus by wave-like contractions called peristalsis. This is an involuntary contraction of smooth muscle. That's correct. Okay. The peristalsis is, of course, created by the muscularis layer, right? Small intestine is separated into colon, rectum, and anus. That should be the large intestine. False. Chyme, which is the partially digested end product that you get after the food has been sitting in the stomach for a couple hours, that is neutralized by pancreatic juice in the duodenum. Okay. Unlike the stomach, the duodenum does not have the mucus protection. And so, with all these acidic chyme coming down, it's going to damage the lining if you do not neutralize it. And that's what the pancreatic juice is. Anybody remember what is the chemical in the pancreatic juice that helps with the neutralization? The question is, what's the chemical found in pancreatic juice that helps with the neutralization reaction? It is sodium bicarbonate. Okay, that's the base that will help neutralize the acid. You should know that. Okay, next one. Duodenum is mainly responsible for nutrient absorption, while jejunum ileum is mainly responsible for nutrient digestion. False. It should be the other way around. Okay. These should be swapped. Bile, which is the stuff that you get from the gallbladder, right? Works by emulsifying fat, which aids in their digestion. True. Okay. Emulsification means you break them down into little droplets and surround them. And that's exactly what bile does. And finally, villi are found in the small intestine to increase surface area for nutrient absorption. That is true. Okay. That's what we talked about on the previous page. Okay, let's do some poll questions. Let's see. Go ahead. I only have 3 people who are participating. I mean, if we're not doing the polls, then I'm not going to be doing it then, because it's you know, it's not a very good use of time if no one is doing it, right? Okay. Let's see. So accessory organ, we literally list them out on the first page, right? So if we go back to here, you can see these are the accessory organs, right? So if you compare it to the list here, appendix is not an accessory organ. Okay, let's do another one. Let's try to get everybody to participate for this one. Even if you don't know the answer, okay, choose something. Okay, if this was a test, what would your educated guess be, right? Okay, the correct answer is submucosa. And again, we wrote this down, right? Like, okay, here, these are the 4 layers of the alimentary canal, and in the submucosa, that's where you'll find the blood vessels, the nerve endings, and you know, of course, also the lymphatic vessels. Okay, next one. So we have 3 pairs of salivary glands. The one that is next to the ear, that is the parotid salivary glands. Underneath the tongue, we have a sublingual gland. Lingual means tongue, right? Sublingual would be underneath the tongue. Like if you're bilingual, you speak 2 languages, right? 2 tongues. So sublingual gland. And then here we have the submandibular gland. Okay, because this bone is called the mandible, as you will learn later. So the one that's next to the ear is the parotid salivary gland. I expect the next one that everybody to get it right. We talked about this several times already today. Please give it a try. Doing number 4. So the function of amylase, again, we wrote it down earlier, which is why it's important to redo these sheets when you have a chance after class, right, on your own. It helps you remember the stuff, right? Consolidate your learning. So amylase here breaks down amylose into these things. And amylose is an example of carbohydrate, right? So the correct answer is to break down carbohydrates. Okay. Next one. Epithelial tissue. Okay, so it looks like the answers are all over the place here. So the esophagus, right? That's the tube that connects the mouth to the stomach. There's a lot of stuff that's passing through it, right? They could be hot, they could be cold, various abrasive type of food that you might be eating. And so you want to protect the esophagus as much as possible. Okay, so last semester we learned about the different types of epithelial tissue. Simple means single layer. Stratify means multiple layers, right? So for best protections, you want to have multiple layers of flat cells. The correct answer is stratify squamous. Just a couple more things, 2 more. Let's try it. The correct answer here is the parietal cells. So for those of you who need a refresher, parietal cells, they produce hydrochloric acid, okay, as well as something called intrinsic factor. Okay, so the intrinsic factor is something that it's a glycoprotein, a sugary protein, which is going to bind to the vitamin B12, all right? Because the B12 is going to be broken down when exposed to the hydrochloric acid. Okay? And if it's broken down, then you cannot absorb it later. So it's important to have the intrinsic factor to protect it. Okay? If someone does not produce intrinsic factor, then they would have B12 deficiency, which could result in a form of anemia. Okay, you need B12 to make your red cells and hemoglobins. Next one, chief cells. Chief cells, they produce the pepsinogen, right, that we talked about, pepsinogen. Okay. And mucus cells, as the name implies, it produces mucus, coats the interior of the stomach lining with a thick layer of mucus, so the acid is not going to digest the stomach. Okay, 2 more. I'm just going to tell you the answers for the interest of time. The function of bile is to, remember, bile is made in the liver, but stored and secreted from the gallbladder, and it's being secreted directly into the duodenum. Bile does not chemically break down fat, rather it emulsifies them, right? And I mentioned earlier, emulsification means you break down the big droplet of fat into smaller droplets, okay? And so the best answer here is it physically breaks down the fat. Okay? Physically means like you chop it up, right? If you take a carrot and you chop it into smaller pieces, that's a chemical, that's a physical change, right? As you learned in your chemistry class. Next one, the purpose of sodium bicarbonate, which I told you explicitly is from the pancreatic juice. And the function of that is to neutralize the chyme in the duodenum. Okay. I hope you you found these questions reasonable. These are considered to be the easier ones that you will find on the test. Now, speaking of the test, I'm sure you're aware by now that there might be a strike tomorrow. I know that the college and the union is negotiating today, but we don't know what the results are going to be. If there is indeed going to be a strike, then you won't be able to reach me. The test, which was originally scheduled for next Tuesday, I actually move it up a little bit. It's you have access to the quiz starting today. You don't have to do it today, okay? If you still want to do it next week, that's fine. But I'm just saying, if there is if there's a strike and you run into some problems, you won't be able to find me because I'll be on strike duty, right? So for those of you who wish to do it a little bit earlier, okay, just get it out of the way. You do have the option of doing that. Okay, so again, the test number 2 is available starting today, all the way until the original day, which is next Tuesday, I believe. Okay, so yeah, we probably will find out tonight, the latest, whether we're gonna have the strike or not. I know it's a stressful situation for you guys, and I apologize that you have been being put in a difficult situation. All right, let's go back to the worksheet here. Okay, so we have the fill in the blanks here. Let's go through it. Okay, let's go through it this time. Okay, instead of asking you to check it yourself. I think there are a few things that we could, mention along the way. First one, the tube that connects. That begins at the mouth and ends at the anus. We call that the alimentary canal. Okay. And also you can call it the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract. Number 2, the innermost layer of the alimentary canal that is in direct contact with food is called the mucosa. Mucosa. This was in the poll question. The layer of the alimentary canal, that contains blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves is called the submucosa. Okay, that is also the layer that helps absorb the food, right, in the jejunum and the ileum, because that's the layer that has the blood vessel. The hard palate is formed by 2 bones. The hard palate is the, if you push your tongue upwards and you feel the roof of your mouth, the hard part, that is basically what the hard palate is. It's formed by 2 bones. The one at the front is called the maxilla. Okay, it's the same bone that forms the teeth socket of your upper row of teeth. Okay? So this is going to be the anterior 2/3 of your hard palate. And then behind that, you're going to have your palatine bone. Okay, so that's the posterior 1/3. We'll learn about these bones when we get to the bone unit. Number 5, the uvula is an extension of the soft palate. It seals the nasopharynx during swallowing. So the food's not going to go up to your nose, right? The fancy word for chewing is mastication, like the act of chewing. Now, this one we also did in the poll, right? The parotid gland is located next to the ear. Something is an enzyme that is found in saliva which breaks down amylose. You should know that by now. We mentioned it multiple times. It is the amylase. When you're chewing your food and then you roll it into a ball before you swallow it, right? That ball of food is called a bolus. Bolus. Wave-like contractions along the GI tract that propels the food forward. That is the peristalsis. Okay? It's not gravity that causes your food to fall down to the stomach, right? You can swallow upside down. You swallow in space where there's no gravity because of these peristalsis, these wave-like contractions. It's like squeezing a tennis ball through a stocking or something. Okay, it's like muscle propulsion that causes them to move forward. What are the three layers of the muscularis of the stomach? So we have the standard two layers, the longitudinal. Okay, these are parallel to the direction of motion, basically squeeze them forward. We have circular, which would be perpendicular to the longitudinal. And the extra layer that is not found in anywhere else in the GI tract, that is the oblique. Okay, the oblique is responsible for like twisting motion. So all these twisting and squeezing and turning that allows the stomach to mix its content. Right, so the food it's gonna get mixed well with the hydrochloric acid, and at the end, after the food has been sitting there for a couple hours, depending what you're eating, I guess if you eat a piece of steak, you might have to sit there for a little bit longer compared to oatmeal. Then it's going to become chyme. The folds in the stomach, we call them the rugae. There is a hole in the diaphragm where the esophagus passes through. We call that the esophageal hiatus. Okay. Sometimes the stomach can squeeze through the hiatus and end up in your thoracic cavity. That is stomach herniation. Sounds pretty painful. 14. Chyme. It refers to the thick, acidic, soapy liquid that leaves the stomach. Basically, when we vomit, the stuff that comes out, that's the chyme. Number 15, pepsinogen is activated by HCl into pepsin. Again, pepsinogen is secreted by the parietal cells, by the chief cells, whereas the HCl is secreted by the parietal cells. Number 16, the glycoprotein that binds to B12, that is the intrinsic factor. Three parts of the small intestine: duodenum, the shortest part, that's for digestion; ileum, and I should write them in the order: jejunum and ileum. The jejunum and the ileum, that's where absorption occurs. Because lipids does not mix well with water, which is the primary component of your blood, you cannot absorb the lipid directly into the bloodstream. Instead, lipids are absorbed through the lacteal, which is a special lymphatic capillary that is found in the villi of the small intestine. Number 19, bile causes lipids to break down into smaller droplets in the process called emulsification. the liver can convert glycerol into glucose when you're starving, for example, or when you're fasting, in a process called gluconeogenesis. Okay, genesis is to create, right? So neo is new, so new glucose are being created. That's what the name means. Lastly, the buffering component found in pancreatic juice. Buffering just means, you know, in this context, it means it neutralizes the hydrochloric acid, right? So we have the sodium bicarbonate that is going to be doing that. Okay. Moving on. I think these long answer questions are pretty self-explanatory. If you have one that you cannot answer, feel free to email me. We're going to look at the application question instead. First one, a patient has esophageal cancer and must have a feeding tube inserted. The nurse tells the patient that the tube will be inserted surgically into the duodenum. The patient's wife asks why the tube will not be inserted into the stomach. What should the nurse say? Okay, so the feeding tube, the food that you'll be administering into the feeding tube is going to be in the liquid form, right? Okay, you're not going to be injecting solid, you know, through a feeding tube. It's going to be basically a mixture of all the nutrients that a person would need. Okay, and to ease with the digestive process, these things are not going to be complex molecules. They're probably in their already broken down monomer forms. So you're going to have your essential amino acids, for example. You're going to have some glucose, perhaps sucrose. So these are already very well broken down macromolecules, nutrients that you need. So there's no need to go through the stomach. The stomach is for breaking down like bulky stuff, right? Like when you actually eat solid food, the acid is what's responsible for breaking that bulky solid food into a soapy mixture, right? Because you're already administering a liquid mixture, there is no need to go to the stomach. It could go directly into the duodenum. All right. Next question. You just ate a large protein for lunch. That's what a protein is if you don't know. Use correct terminologies and anatomy. Describe how the protein will be digested and absorbed in your digestive tract. This one is pretty self-explanatory. So what kind of macromolecule is in a protein? Can someone tell me? What's the major component of a protein if you eat it? I mean, nobody really reads the nutritional value, but you know, yeah, it's basically carbs, right? Like all those French fries, all those potatoes, you're gonna have lots of carbs, carbohydrates, right? What else is in this protein? What are the cheese made of? If carbs is the major component of the fries, what is the cheese made up of? Yeah, there's lipids. Lipids would be mostly in the gravy, I would say. And the cheese is primarily proteins. Okay, there's some lipids in this as well. So these are the major things that are found in the in your protein, and you will want to think about, you know, how carbohydrates are digested. Right? So, for example, we talked about carbohydrates are going to be broken down in the mouth, right? With the amylase. Proteins not going to be broken down until we get to the stomach, and then the lipids is going to be broken down in the duodenum, right? So you want to be able to keep track of all these macromolecules, where they are, how they're going to be absorbed, and so on and so forth. And all that actually is described in detail in your PowerPoint slides. So you can definitely go look it up there. Okay, last one is a good one. Chronic inflammation of the pancreas is called pancreatitis. Impairs the digestive functions of this organ. What would be the effect on digestion and absorption of carbohydrates, fat, and proteins? Okay, so it's important to know that the pancreas is responsible for secreting, you know, NaHCO3 plus the digestive enzymes, right? Digestive enzymes. So if it's experiencing inflammation, then these things are going to be compromised. Without the digestive enzymes, you would have trouble breaking down all of these macromolecules. Sure, you broke down a little bit of carbohydrates in the mouth and a bit of proteins in the stomach, but still a majority of the chemical digestion happens in the duodenum. And that process relies on the digestive enzymes that are coming from the pancreas, right? So if the pancreas is not really working well, right, because of inflammatory situation, then you will experience indigestion. And if you don't properly break down the proteins into amino acids, for example, you won't be able to absorb them, okay? Because in the jejunum, in the ileum, in order to absorb these food, there are receptors for them. And the receptors are designed to absorb amino acid. So if it's not in the form of the amino acid that they expect, right? If you have like a long chain of them, rather, you won't be able to absorb them, right? So you will probably have malnutrition as well. If you are not secreting the NaHCl3 at a level that is adequate, you will also not be able to neutralize the chyme in the duodenum. And as a result, you are going to perhaps have duodenal ulcer, because the chyme will now be irritating the lining of the duodenum. And if this is a chronic situation, chronic means it keeps on happening, right? Long term, right? Then eventually it's going to damage the lining, creating an ulcer. Okay, so that is it for this lecture. It's pretty simple compared to the brain, right? I mean, still you have to memorize stuff, but not nearly as much for the brain. So any questions before we move on? Now we do have the lab test coming up as well. And instead of taking up the lab, I think I'll just post the answer for the lab for you to check yourself. I'd rather use the time to do the test 2 review for you. Okay, so this is the test 2 review. And do you guys have this? Anybody not know where to find it? The test 2 review, just pop me a message if you do not have the test 2 review. All of you have it? Okay, that's great. All right. Let me get the link for you. Okay, there is the link. Okay, I'll give you guys a moment to go find it. I will be right back in a couple minutes. So in the meantime, you can go download the review, so you can maybe type the answer in as I take it up, or if you have a printer, you can print it out as well. Okay, so I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, let's take this thing up. First part of the question is to complete the table related to brain structures and their functions. All right, so here we go. Now, I'm not going to write like too many details. I'm just going to keep it at bare minimum. This review serve as just like a quick reference sheet for you, if you would, in case you need to look it up or something, during the test or whatever. Okay, for the detailed explanation, you probably want to go look at the PowerPoint slides. Okay, so the main function of the thalamus is to filter and relay sensory information to the appropriate parts of the brain, right? So if it's visual information, it's going to send it to the occipital lobe. If it's information related to taste, it is going to go to the gustatory region of the brain, right, which is located on the insula. Okay, if it's sensory information related to touching a hot surface, that's going to go to the parietal lobe, right? So all sensory information will go through the thalamus except for smell. Okay, so except all sensory information. Pass through the thalamus, except for smell. How many thalamus do we have? Someone please tell me. Couple questions here, okay, that you should think about, even if you don't want to tell me the answer. How many thalamus do we have? Number one. Number two, how would you describe the location of the thalamus? And number three, is thalamus white matter or gray matter? Okay, does anybody want to tell me the answer to those questions? First of all, how many do we have? Okay, very good. Savi said we have two. So you have two thalami, okay, the left one and the right one. What structure exists between the thalami? Anybody? These are all fair questions on the test, right? What structure exists between the thalami? I believe you're trying to say the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is it's not between the thalami, but you're correct. One of the ventricles is between the two thalami. Which ventricle is it? Okay, let's do a poll. See if okay, you already tell me the answer, Savi. Very good. It is the third ventricle. Okay, the third ventricle, the sides of the third ventricle is actually created by the thalamus themselves. And finally, is thalamus white matter or gray matter? Right? And you should know the difference between white and gray, right? Like functionally speaking. Thalamus, white or gray? Anybody? Well, it's doing all these, filtering and relaying. That is like information processing, right? Anytime you need to process information, you need to have gray matter. Okay, so thalamus is gray matter. Next, we have the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is called a master gland, right? Master gland. It's involved in homeostasis. Okay, homeostasis through hormone. Okay, so hypothalamus has its own hormones, right? That helps regulate things like water balance, but it will also control the secretion of other endocrine glands. Okay, and it works with the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland that kind of hangs below the hypothalamus. And next, of course, we have the pituitary gland. Okay, it secretes various hormones involved in homeostasis. Okay, there's lots of hormones from the pituitary gland. Some regulates your metabolism. Some regulates your things like menstrual cycle. Some regulates resource availability in the body, right? Stress level. Lots of hormones from the pituitary gland, which you'll learn about later on. Next one, the hippocampus. Okay, hippocampus is part of the limbic system. It is responsible for forming long-term memory. Long-term memory. Okay, so the lyrics of your favorite song when you went to high school, you remember it, that's going to be in your hippocampus. And all these stuff that you're trying to memorize right now, okay, that you will forget if you don't reinforce them. Right? You'll probably forget it after the test or something. Those are not yet in the hippocampus. Okay, they're not part of your long-term memories yet. If things are in your long-term memory, they don't go away. Okay? It's like you will never forget your name, for example. That's in your long-term memory. Amygdala. What does the amygdala do? Anyone? In one word, what does the amygdala do? Help me out here, guys. Thank you, Jyoti. That is the emotion. Right? It is also part of your limbic system. Okay, all those feelings that you had when you experienced something pleasant or unpleasant, those emotionally charged scenarios that you get, it's part of the amygdala. Okay, you will have no emotion if you damage your amygdala. Next one, medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata is part of your brainstem. So it is responsible for a lot of the autonomic stuff, right? So one of the things we learned very early in the course is it regulates breathing. Regulates breathing. Okay, part of the brainstem. And we also learned that 90% of the tracks cross the midline here at the medulla oblongata. And it's also responsible for various cranial reflexes, right? Okay, such as swallowing, vomiting, coughing. Okay, all those things are regulated by the medulla oblongata. So when you take like cough syrup, right? Like codeine, for example, it suppresses your medulla oblongata, so you stop coughing. Reticular formation. Yes, Patrick, go ahead.
What is that last word right there where it says 90% of tracks?
Oh, yes, sorry. Cross the midline, the middle, right? Midline.
Thank you, sir.
No, thank you. At the medulla oblongata. Reticular formation. This is a web of gray matter. Web of gray matter that runs through the midbrain. And the function of the reticular formation is to maintain consciousness. Okay. It uses all the sensory input from various sources, your eyes, your ears, so on and so forth. And it uses those stimuli to arouse the brain. Okay. If you damage the reticular formation, you're going to fall into a coma, right? Remember, we talked about that in the lecture. Okay, corpus callosum, it's a bundle of white matter. It enables communication between the hemispheres. The two halves of the brain, they need to talk to each other. Right? It's going to go through the corpus callosum. It's that thing that's on top of, like, if you remember the mid-sagittal diagram of the brain, right? You would have the lateral ventricle right here, and on top of it, there is always a band. That band is the corpus callosum. And below this is your third ventricle, right? The oval with the dot in the middle, right? And then the hypothalamus, for example, and the pituitary gland. You should draw it out in your own way to help you compartmentalize, which part goes where. Right? It's a good way to learn it. All right, next one, we have the cerebellum. Cerebellum has three major functions. Number one, it maintains balance and posture, right? Just by sitting there at your chair right now, you're not slouching over to keep you upright in that position. For example, your back muscle has to contract continuously, and all these happens without conscious thought because your cerebellum is doing its job. Okay. Another function of cerebellum is to ensure smooth execution of motion. Okay? If you're trying to ride a bike, if you're trying to, shoot a basketball, you're trying to type on the computer, all these things can happen seamlessly without pausing, without, jerky motions, because the cerebellum works with the frontal lobe to ensure it's happening in a smooth manner. And what is the last function of the cerebellum? Anybody remember? The last function of the cerebellum that is not here. What is being exactly? Well, not long-term memory, but it stores skills memory. Yeah, long-term memory is stored in the hippocampus. Right? Remember, the hippocampus means the seahorse looking structure, right? So that's the long-term memory. So all the factual stuff, your multiplication tables and all that stuff, that's in the hippocampus. But the cerebellum is for skill memory, store skill memories, okay, or muscle memories, right? They call it, all right? So you can type with your eyes closed. You know exactly where the keys are. That's skill memory. If you get a new keyboard, it feels a little bit weird. You might, take a few days to get used to it. That is going to require like rewiring in the cerebellum. Okay, but all those things are stored in here. Okay? Yeah, exactly right. As Mary said, riding a bike. That was like the example I kept on using in class, right? Okay, pawns. Pawns means bridge. Another question, right? Just for those of you who are thinking about this, what structure is located between the pons and the cerebellum? If this was a test question, what structure is located between the pons, behind the pons, and in front of the cerebellum? What is that? If you're thinking about the fourth ventricle, then you will be correct. Okay, the fourth ventricle is located between the pons and the cerebellum. Okay, so what does the pons do? The pons basically, pons means bridge, right? In French, I think it's pontes in French or something. So it connects various parts of the brain. Connects various parts of the brain with tracks. Okay, tracks are just bundles of axons, right? And of course, the pons also have its own cranial nerve coming out. Next one, choroid plexus. Choroid plexus are these vascular structure. Vascular structure. Vascular means it has blood vessels, right? Vascular structures found in the walls of ventricles. Okay, and the function is to produce cerebrospinal fluid, CSF. Okay. It has the ependymal cells, if you remember, which makes the CSF. All right, so definitely have this sheet with you. Either memorize it or like have this sheet with you when you're doing the test, right? Like it will help you. Okay. Keep on telling you like it's okay to have some notes in front of you when you do the online test. It's understood that it is open book. Okay. Next part here, we are supposed to identify the key functional area that is being mentioned here, and we're gonna talk about the function. So primary motor cortex. Let's highlight that on our diagram here, on a nice brain right here. That would be the primary motor cortex, right? Okay. This right here, this line, that is the central sulcus. Sulcus means a groove. Okay, central sulcus. And in front of the central sulcus, you have your pre-central gyrus. Okay? Gyrus is a bump. So on that gyrus, you will find a primary motor cortex. The function of the primary motor cortex is to allow voluntary muscle movement. Okay. So the left side of the brain controls the right half of the body and vice versa. We are looking at the left half of the brain here. So to move your right finger as you're writing, for example, right now, you would need to originate that command from the left primary motor cortex. Okay. Primary somatosensory cortex. Well, here it is again. There is the central sulcus. The central sulcus is the groove that separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. And the primary somatosensory cortex is located right here. Right here. Okay, that is for processing somatosensory information. And again, for those of you who need a refresher on what somatosensory information means, it is things like things that you feel with your skin. Okay, so temperature, right? Texture, touch, pain, all these things that you're able to feel with your skin, they will first go through the thalamus. And then if it's relevant, it's going to go to your primary somatosensory cortex. Okay. When I say relevant, for example, like you're not, for example, like at this instant, you are not feeling the texture of your clothing, right, on your skin. Okay, because that is not relevant information at the moment. So your thalamus will filter that out, and it will not get sent to the primary somatosensory cortex. It's only things that are relevant that would get through the thalamus and to your respective lobe. Okay, Broca's area. Anybody remember what the Broca's area do? What does it do? I'm gonna highlight it, tell you where it is, but please tell me what it does. Broca's area is around here on the left side for most people. What does Broca's area allow you to do? Something that I am doing a lot of. That's right. It allows to have a speech, right? Basically, articulate speech. Using the right words in the right context. Okay, being able to express yourself in a fluent, articulate manner. That is the Broca's area. If you damage the Broca's area, as you learned before, you will have Broca's aphasia. Okay? You will not be able to, speak in a fluent, articulate manner, and you'll be using the wrong words in the wrong context, for example. Okay, next one is the Wernicke's area. Wernicke's area, just like the Broca's area, is primarily found on the left lobe for most people, and it is located right here in the parietal lobe. In the temporal lobe rather. And the function of that is to understand speech plus written instruction. Yeah, exactly, right? Interpret written or oral message. So if you're reading this stuff and you know what I'm talking and you understand what it's saying, your Wernicke's area is working. Okay, this is not about not being able to understand a language that you don't speak. Okay, if you damage the Wernicke's area, you won't be able to understand a language that is your native tongue. Okay, like if it's written or if it's spoken to you, you won't understand. And if this happens early on in age, eventually you will not be able to speak properly either, because when we talk, we're able to hear what we're saying, right? And if we say something wrong, we're going to be able to correct it ourselves. But if you damage the Wernicke's area, you actually might have trouble understanding what you are saying yourself, and eventually you will compromise your ability to speak properly as well. Okay, so those are the four main areas in the chart. Number 3, describe the anatomy of the spinal cord. I did that in the lecture recordings already, in quite a bit of detail. You know what? Maybe I'll quickly do it again here. Okay, and I'm gonna combine it with question number 4 here. All right. So let's say you touch a hot surface. This is your hand. Okay, and you touch a hot surface. Okay, like a candle or whatever. then what happens is you're gonna have these sensory neurons, right? That will relay that information to your spinal cord. Okay, now here is a transverse section of your spinal cord. Okay, remember there is a little butterfly structure in the middle of your spinal cord, right? Okay, there's your central canal. And what happens is this sensory neuron is going to enter at the back of your spinal cord. This is the dorsal side. Dorsal means the back, and this is the ventral side. Ventral means the front. So sensory information will always be entering at the dorsal side. And then it will make a synaptic connection with this interneuron. Okay, remember, interneurons are found exclusively in the central nervous system. You will only find it in the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, and you will find it interneuron in gray matter. Okay, so the gray matter is the butterfly, right, in the spinal cord. And then the interneuron will process that information and then send it back out to your hand to remove it. Okay, so over here, the sensory neuron at the back, I should label it for you, sensory neuron. Whereas at the front, we have the motor neuron. Okay, so the sensory neuron and the motor neuron actually combines together in a bundle to form your spinal nerve. Okay, how many spinal nerves do we have? Anybody remember that? "31 pairs, right? 31 pairs. Okay. Now, at the same time that this is happening, your sensory neuron will actually, make a synaptic connection with another neuron. Okay, and these neurons are going to be forming what we call the ascending tracts. Okay, they're going to be going up to your brain. So that's the ascending tract. Okay, they will go through the brainstem. Okay, and at the medulla oblongata, they will cross the midline. Okay, this is the midline. Midline is the center of the body, right? So at the medulla oblongata, I mentioned earlier, like 90% of the tracks. Sorry guys, just give me a moment. I'll be right back. I have to take a call. Sorry about that. Call from my kid's school. Anyway, let's keep going. The ascending tract is going to cross the midline at the medulla oblongata, right? 90% of the tracks are going to cross the midline there, right? Okay, the rest will just cross somewhere. For example, like the information from your right ear, right? It's gonna have to go to the left side of the brain, but it's not gonna, like, your ear is actually on top of your brainstem, right? So it doesn't make sense in terms of wiring to go down back to the brainstem and then come back up. So it's probably gonna cross at the corpus callosum or something, right? And you're gonna have your thalamus right here, right? Thalamus is gonna filter all the information, okay? And the information about the burning here is going to go through the thalamus, and then finally it is going to end up in your primary somatosensory cortex. Sensory cortex. Okay. Similarly, there might be some kind of motor action that is required. So from your primary motor cortex, okay, that information will come back down. It will cross the midline at the medulla oblongata, and then it will be coming down at the front where you have what we call the descending tract. Okay, now you might be wondering, you're like, wait. We already removed our hand through this spinal reflex. What other motor function is going to be coming down from the brain? Well, I don't know. Like think about last time that you burned your hand, right? After you remove the hand, you might be, blowing air into it to cool it down. You might be rubbing your hands together to ease the pain. All those extra things that you do after the initial removal of your hand, that comes from the brain, okay, rather than the spinal cord. Okay? The spinal cord is just the initial reflex that causes you to remove the hand. Anything that comes after that is going to be from the brain. Are we okay? Does anybody have any questions so far with everything that we talked about? Okay. Let's do some of these multiple choice. Are you guys up for the polls? Or you rather me just take it up? What's better for you? Okay, let me know. Because again, like not all of you are participating at the polls. As best, like half of you are doing it. So what's better for you? Do you guys want me to do the poll? Just take it up, yeah? Patrick said just take it up. Does the rest of you agree? Yeah, take it up. All right, let's just take it up. Probably the most efficient way of doing this. Okay, yeah, thank you. Identify the indicator part. Okay, so like you will most definitely see something like this. Okay, I'm pointing to this structure. What is that? Well, here is the lateral ventricle, and on top of it, sitting on top of it like a crown, that is the corpus callosum. Okay, and corpus callosum is responsible for communication between the hemisphere. Okay, left, right hemisphere communicating with each other through the white matter, the corpus callosum. Next one, identify the indicator part again. Right here, that little oval thing, okay, in the part of the brainstem, that is the pons. Okay, this here is the cerebellum. And earlier I asked you what is between the pons and the cerebellum, and that is this triangle-looking thing. That's the fourth ventricle. Okay, so like that's what you need to do every time you see like a brain diagram. Try to identify as many things as you can. Okay, corpus callosum here again, right? This oval with the dot in the center, that is your third ventricle, right? Next one. Which of the following is not a function of the indicator part? So again, that is the cerebellum. Cerebellum is responsible for storing motor skill, smooth execution of motion, maintain balance and posture, but it is not going to help maintain alertness and consciousness. Okay, help me out here, please. What is responsible for doing that? It's not the cerebellum, but what structure is responsible for maintaining alertness and consciousness? I hope you're alert right now. What structure is responsible for that? It's a very long name. It has two parts. Anybody remember it? If you're thinking about the reticular formation, you're correct. Reticular formation, the web of gray matter that is responsible for, doing this, okay? Maintaining alertness and consciousness. Okay, next one. What is this? We just colored it earlier, right? This is your central sulcus. Central sulcus. And in front of it, that is your primary motor cortex. That's responsible for all the voluntary action, right? That you're gonna do. This one, it's a deep structure in the brain. This is actually directly from your PowerPoint. That is the thalamus that we're pointing at. Again, thalamus filters sensory information except for smell. This is a frontal section of your head, also taken from your study guide. And this opening here, this little triangle, that is the dural venous sinus. The dural venous sinus is formed when your two layers of dura mater separates, okay? And the function of the durovenous sinus, in case you forgot, is to drain CSF. All right. Next one, this region in the frontal lobe is called the Broca's area. Enables speech. Damage to here is going to result in, okay, so first of all, you got to understand what we are pointing at. And over here, you can see, I hope you can see by now that this is the central sulcus, yes? So behind the central sulcus is going to be your primary somatosensory cortex. Primary somatosensory cortex, and that is responsible for processing feelings, right? Not like emotion type of feeling, but like feelings from your body, right? And so if you damage the left side, you would be unable to feel from the right side of the body. It depends. I mean, depends on which part it's damaged, right? Then, you know, that part of the body you won't be able to feel. All right, and we have a lot of more stuff to do here. So why don't we take a quick break, maybe 5 minutes, and we'll resume afterwards. If you have any question, please type it in the chat, and I'll make sure I address it. Okay, so I'll see you in 5 minutes. Number 13, hydrocephalus. These are all like conditions, right? Okay, so hydrocephalus is something that happens when the flow of CSF, flow of cerebrospinal fluid, is blocked somehow. Okay, is interrupted. So you have a buildup of these fluid in the brain, causing the pressure to be high in the brain, and you know it's going to be compressing the walls of the ventricles, and that could lead to a bunch of problems. Okay, meningitis is the inflammation of the meninges, okay, which could be caused by bacteria, virus, or even fungus, and that could lead to, you know, at the beginning you might have like severe headaches, stiff neck, and you would need to be diagnosed by either like a MRI, or they can take a sample of your CSF through a spinal tap to determine if you have meningitis. If left untreated, it could be fatal. Okay, glaucoma. Glaucoma is increase in eye pressure that leads to damage of optic nerve. Damage optic nerve. You will progressively lose your vision, starting with your peripheral vision. There's no treatment for glaucoma, but you can have intervention that would help reduce the eye pressure, so you can slow the progression of the condition. Next one is astigmatism. So astigmatism is you have an uneven lens. Okay, causes scattering of light. Scattering of light in the eye. And that makes it difficult to focus on object. Okay, and for those of you who actually have astigmatism, I have astigmatism as well, you will find that it's particularly difficult to see things at night, you know, without your glasses, because all the lights would be scattering in the eye, and you know, if it's raining at night, it's very difficult to drive because of that reason. Presbyopia, that is related to aging, right? To aging. In presbyopia, we lose the ability to visually accommodate, right? Okay. So visual accommodation is basically changing the shape of the lens as you shift the focus. Okay, so if you're just looking up, looking at, I don't know, walking around looking at things, okay, and then all of a sudden you need to read something on your phone. You look down, you might not be able to change the lens to thick enough to focus on it, and therefore you cannot see what's on the phone clearly. That is a presbyopia. Floaters, these are basically debris that builds up in the aqueous humor. Okay, that's the fluid that's between your lens and your cornea. Okay? And people with bad eyesight tend to have more floaters. Today is a bright sunny day, so if you look out your windows, look at the sky, and you blink a couple of times right now, and if you see things are flying across your field of vision, those are basically floaters. You would know if you have floaters, okay, because they're pretty annoying stuff. Cataracts. What is cataracts? Cataracts is basically the lens turning opaque. Okay. Lens is supposed to be transparent, but if the protein in it starts to crystallize, then it turns opaque and you won't be able to see. Again, it's a progressive thing. You will progressively lose vision. Fortunately, you can do surgery to fix cataracts. Myopia is a fancy word for nearsightedness. Remember, these names tells you what you can see. Okay, so in nearsightedness, you can see close by, but not far away. The opposite of myopia is hyperopia, which is farsightedness. Okay, so you can see far away, no problem, but you cannot see nearby. This is different from presbyopia. Presbyopia is as you shift your focus, you cannot see the nearby things. Okay, but when given time, eventually your eye will be able to focus. But for hyperopia, it's an ongoing thing. Okay. So last class, we talked about what kind of lens we need to fix these problems and the underlying cause of these. For example, myopia is your eyeball is too long, okay? Whereas hyperopia, the eyeball is too short. And so please make sure you are familiar with those. These are good questions for you to go through yourself. As light ray enters the eye, list all the structure it passes through. So for example, it's going to pass through your cornea first, go through the aqueous humor, through the lens, and so on and so forth. You need to make a list of all those structures, okay? And it shouldn't be hard. It's in the lecture notes. The neuronal pathway for transmitting visual information, we did that last week as well. It was that diagram with the right field of view and the left field of view, this one. Okay, so make sure you're able to reproduce that on your own. Where is the test review? Right here. Okay, and here is the ear. Maybe we'll label it together. Starting right here, we have our ear canal or auditory canal. Okay, so sound's gonna, oh no, sorry, not that. I was looking at the wrong way. This is the ear. Fancy word for ear is pinna. And then the sound wave is gonna come in through the auditory canal. The sound waves is gonna strike this structure, the eardrum. But nothing is simple in this course. We cannot call it the eardrum. We have to call it the tympanic membrane. Okay, when people check their temperature and they use the thermometer in the ear, they basically is checking the temperature of the tympanic membrane. Now, attached to the tympanic membrane, we have our 3 ossicles, the little bones in the ear that helps amplify the sound, starting with the one that looks like a hammer. That is the malleus, aka hammer. Looks more like a chicken drumstick to me. The next one here is the incus, or an anvil. An anvil is the thing that the blacksmith hammers on, right? And finally, we have this thing right here. That is the stapes. Stapes, or a stirrup. Stirrup is the thing that you put your feet on when you ride a horse, or the thing that you put your feet on when you're giving birth. Okay, the stirrup. It's the only one that actually looks like what they're describing. Okay, what else do we have? Over here, we have the semicircular canal. Okay, they are responsible for detecting head movements. Last class, we talked about, doing the pirouette, the cartwheel, and the somersault, and it stimulates different parts of the semicircular canal. This here is the cochlea. All right, and this one here is probably a little bit obscure, but this is pointing at the round window. Okay, the oval window is the one that the stapes is pressing on. As the stapes pushes on the oval window, the excess pressure will be alleviated from the round window. Okay, and finally, this tube that is normally closed, but it will open when you swallow. That is the eustachian tube. The function of the eustachian tube is to equilibrate the pressure in your head with the environment. And again, when you're on a plane or in an elevator that's going up, sometimes your ears get plugged because the pressure outside is dropping as you ascend. And to equalize the pressure, you need to swallow. And some people say, chew gum and it will help. It's not the chewing gum that's helping. Is the, chewing gum makes you swallow more. And the swallowing will open up the eustachian tube, let out the excess pressure. All right. That is that. More multiple choice. Let's get to it. Which of the following is not a function of the digestive system? So ingestion of food, that's the function. Absorption of nutrients, elimination of indigestible waste, movement of nutrients to cell, that is not the function of the digestive system. Okay, that's just something that happens on the cellular level through active transport, for example. Number 18, which of the following is not a function of saliva? Okay, so saliva will not start the digestion of protein. That happens, I told you, in the stomach, right? Everything else is correct here. Okay, moisten the food so we can swallow it. It's actually very difficult to swallow without saliva. Right? You might have heard of the cinnamon challenge or something, right? That people are doing online before. Someone actually choked and died because you cannot swallow without the saliva. No, the cinnamon actually would suck up all the moisture. Okay, so that's very important to have the saliva. It will start digestion of the starch because of amylase and removal of microbes because saliva has a lysozyme, right? Something we learned earlier in the course. Food that leaves the mouth and enters the pharynx in the form of bolus. Carbohydrates is first chemically digested in, we talked about this multiple times already, in the mouth. What prevents acid from backing up into the esophagus from the stomach? That is the cardiac sphincter. Okay, pyloric sphincter is the one at the bottom. It controls how much food goes into the duodenum. It squirts them forward, kind of like a water gun. The rugae are the foldings in the stomach, and they will disappear as you fill up the stomach. And ileocecal sphincter. is the one that's between the ileum and the cecum. Label the following diagram. This is probably something you can do on your own. You know, it's good exercise to go through it on your own and make sure that you know what goes where. And that is it for the test to review. Okay, so again, right, the test is available today. I mean, I don't recommend you doing it today, but you know, definitely try to do it earlier if you could. But yeah, if you have any question, please reach out to me today. In case there is a strike tomorrow, you won't be able to get a hold of me, unfortunately. So I hope I will see you next week.
Professor,
Yes, go ahead.
do you mean the test or the lab?
The test. You have a
Okay.
test next Tuesday, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I open it, you know, earlier, so some of you can have it because I don't know what's gonna happen. Okay, maybe they will shut down the learning management system, the e-center. I don't know what's gonna happen. Okay, but don't rush into it, guys. Okay, if for some reason you're not gonna be able to finish the test, you know, during the strike or something, when we return, we'll make it work afterwards. Okay. Other than that, hopefully I'll see you next week. If not, take care, and hopefully we'll resume soon enough. Okay. All right. Have a good one, guys. Thanks for coming. Bye for now.